A young girl, a cruel punishment, a wall of fire. But when no one else would save her, someone did, the last person anyone expected. What happened next would challenge everything her people believed, and everything has stood for. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The year was 1867. And the Texas frontier remained a tumultuous place where different worlds collided with little understanding between them. 12-year-old Elizabeth Harmon, with her wheat blonde hair and determined blue eyes, had never quite fit into the rigid expectations of Clearwater, the small settlement her family had helped establish 3 years prior. While other girls practiced needlework and cooking, Elizabeth would sneak away to explore the surrounding hills and practice shooting her father's old rifle when no one was watching. Elizabeth Marie Harmon. Her mother's voice cut through the late afternoon air as Elizabeth returned from another unauthorized exploration. "Where have you been? The Reverend and his wife have been waiting for nearly an hour." The Harmon household was unusually tense that evening. Elizabeth's father, Thomas Harmon, had been appointed the settlement's new administrator following the previous leader's death from fever. With this new position came heightened expectations for the entire family, especially Elizabeth. "Your behavior reflects on all of us now," her father explained sternly over dinner after their guests had departed. "The community looks to us for guidance, for an example of proper Christian living." Elizabeth pushed her food around her plate. "I was just looking at the wildflowers along the creek, Father. I found some that might have medicinal—" "Enough!" Thomas slammed his hand on the table. "This fascination with the wilderness must end. You are becoming a young lady, and it's time you acted accordingly." Later that night, Elizabeth overheard her parents discussing her future in hushed, worried tones. "The girl needs discipline, Mary. Perhaps Reverend Collins' suggestion has merit. His sister's school in St. Louis specializes in difficult cases." Elizabeth's heart sank. She had heard about such schools, places where girls were molded into proper society women through strict regimens and sometimes harsh methods. The thought of being sent away filled her with dread. 2 days later, disaster struck the settlement. While playing near the storeroom against her parents' orders, Elizabeth accidentally knocked over a lantern. The flames quickly spread, destroying the settlement's winter food reserves. Though no one was hurt, the community's survival was now threatened. With winter approaching, a town meeting was hastily called. Elizabeth stood trembling before the gathered settlers, her parents' faces etched with disappointment and fear. "Examples must be set," Reverend Collins declared to murmurs of agreement. "Discipline must be maintained, especially in these dangerous territories." The punishment decided upon was meant to serve as a warning to all the children. Elizabeth would be tied to the post in the center of the settlement for a day and a night, a public shaming that would demonstrate the seriousness of carelessness on the frontier. As the rope was secured around her wrists, binding her to the wooden post, Elizabeth fought back tears. She had not meant to cause harm. Now, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she faced the approaching night with growing fear. Stories of wolves and mountain lions filled her thoughts, but even more terrifying were the whispered tales of Comanche raiders who had been spotted in the region. What no one in Clearwater fully understood was that they were being watched. From east, the distant ridge, a young Comanche warrior named Tabe observed the settlement through narrowed eyes. At 22, he was already known among his people for his wisdom and courage. He had been tracking a group of horse thieves who had stolen from his band when he noticed the unusual activity in the white settlement. Through his spyglass, traded years ago from Mexican merchants, he could see the small figure tied to the post. Even from this distance, he could tell it was a child. His brow furrowed in confusion and growing concern as the adults walked away, leaving the child alone as darkness approached. The Numunu, the people, as the Comanche called themselves, treated their children as precious gifts. Even in matters of discipline, no child would ever be placed in physical danger as punishment. What Tabe witnessed troubled him deeply and went against everything he believed about honor and the protection of the innocent. As night fell and a chill wind blew, across the plains Elizabeth stood alone, her wrists raw from the ropes. In the darkness, the settlement grew quiet except for the distant howl of a wolf that made her blood run cold. Little did she know that her fate was about to become entwined with that of a warrior from a world completely different from her own. Warrior who lived by a code that would not allow him to ride away from a child in danger, regardless of what people she belonged to. And as the first stars appeared in the Texas sky, both Elizabeth and Taabe stood at the threshold of events that would forever change not only their lives, but the relationship between two communities caught in the complex web of a changing American frontier. The night grew colder as clouds obscured the moon, plunging the settlement into near-total darkness. Elizabeth shivered against the wooden post, her thin cotton dress offering little protection against the biting wind. The few lanterns hanging from nearby buildings cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to dance menacingly around her. Every creak and rustling sound from the surrounding wilderness made her heart race. "I won't cry," she whispered to herself repeatedly, though tears had already carved paths down her dirt-smudged cheeks. "I won't give them the satisfaction." In the Harmon household, Mary Harmon paced anxiously by the window, peering out at the distant silhouette of her daughter. "Thomas, this isn't right," she pleaded with her husband. "She's just a child." "The temperature's dropping and there have been reports of—" "The decision was made by the council, not just me," Thomas replied, though his voice lacked conviction. He stared into the fireplace, the dancing flames reflecting his internal conflict. "Breaking the rules has consequences. Elizabeth needs to learn that." "Learn what, Thomas? To fear her own community? To distrust her parents' protection?" Mary's voice broke. "What kind of lesson is that?" Outside the settlement, Taab moved silently, through the underbrush, approaching cautiously. Years of hunting and scouting had taught him patience and stealth. The white settlers' defenses were minimal, a few tired men keeping watch at the perimeter, more concerned with staying warm than maintaining vigilance. Through gaps between buildings, Taabe could now clearly see the girl. Her head hung low, but occasionally she would look up at the sky, revealing a face that, despite its fear, showed remarkable determination. This was not a child broken by her circumstances. Something about her resilience reminded him of his younger sister, Naru, who had defied tribal expectations to become a hunter rather than following traditional women's roles. A commotion at the far end of the settlement suddenly drew the attention of the watchman. Shouts erupted as a small group of mounted men rode into the settlement from the opposite direction. "Raiders! To arms!" came the cry, followed by the chaotic sounds of people rushing to defend their homes. Taabe recognized the tactics immediately. These weren't Comanche warriors. They were the same horse thieves he'd been tracking, opportunistic bandits who preyed on isolated settlements and then disappeared into territory the army wouldn't follow. They were using a common diversionary tactic, creating chaos at one end of the settlement to mask their true objective, the corral of horses at the other end. In the confusion, no one noticed as a burning torch was thrown onto the roof of a barn near Elizabeth. The dry timber caught quickly, flames leaping upward into the night sky. Within minutes, the fire spread to adjacent structures, creating a wall of flames that separated Elizabeth from the rest of the settlement. Through the thickening smoke, Elizabeth could hear screams and gunfire, but no one came for her. The ropes, binding her wrists, felt impossibly tight as she pulled frantically against them. The heat grew intense and breathing became difficult as smoke filled her lungs. "Help!" she screamed, her voice barely audible above the roaring flames. "Please, someone help me!" Across the settlement, Mary Harmon fought against her husband's restraining arms. "Our daughter is out there," she cried desperately. "It's too dangerous. The whole area is engulfed," Thomas shouted, his face ashen with regret and fear. "We need to wait for the men to control the fire. By then it will be too late." Mary collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by helplessness. Taabe had seen enough. The white settlers were focused on protecting their property and fighting off the raiders at the far end of the settlement. No one was moving toward the child surrounded by growing flames. Whatever the conflicts between their peoples, whatever reasons the whites had for punishing one of their own children this way, he could not stand by and watch an innocent die. Returning to where he'd hidden his horse, a magnificent painted Mustang, named Siwap, Lightning. Tabe mounted and prepared himself. He unwrapped a length of wet leather from his waterskin and tied it around his lower face to filter the smoke. Then, with a soft word to his loyal companion, he urged Siwap forward. Elizabeth had nearly lost consciousness when she heard it, the powerful rhythm of hoofbeats approaching, somehow different from the chaotic sounds of the raid. Through stinging, smoke-filled eyes, she looked up to see an extraordinary sight cutting through the wall of flames. A mounted warrior on a paint horse, his long black hair streaming behind him, riding directly toward her with unwavering purpose. Time seemed to slow as the Comanche warrior emerged from the smoke like a figure from another world. The settlers who noticed him froze in confusion and fear, their worst nightmare seemingly come to life in the midst of chaos. But Tabe paid them no attention, focused entirely on reaching the child before the flames consumed her. With a powerful leap, Siwap carried Tabe through the narrowest part of the fire line. The heat was blistering, singeing the horse's mane and the fringes of Taabe's buckskin clothing. Landing on the other side, he guided his horse directly to the post where Elizabeth hung limply against her bonds. In one fluid motion, Taabe dismounted, drew his knife, and cut through the ropes binding the girl. As she collapsed forward, he caught her small form and lifted her onto his horse. There was no time for explanations or reassurances. The flames were closing in around them, creating a shrinking island of survivable space. Remounting behind Elizabeth, Tabe cradled her unconscious body with one arm while gripping Siwap's mane with the other. He whispered words of encouragement to his horse, asking for one more feat of bravery from his trusted companion. Siwap responded magnificently, gathering his strength and launching forward through the thickest part of the fire. The horse's coat smoldered, and Tabe felt the searing pain of flames licking at his exposed skin, but they pushed through, emerging on the other side into the relative safety of the open prairie beyond the settlement. Behind them, clear water burned while its inhabitants fought desperately against both fire and raiders. Ahead lay uncertainty, as Tabe carried an unconscious white child away from her people, an action that could easily be interpreted as kidnapping by the settlers and the army. Yet in that moment of decision, facing the barrier of fire and prejudice, Taabe had chosen the path that his ancestors and the wisdom of the Numunu had taught him, that courage is measured by one's willingness to protect the innocent, regardless of the color of their skin or the language they spoke. As they rode into the darkness, Elizabeth stirred slightly in his arms, her smoke-stained face peaceful in unconsciousness, unaware that her rescue would set in motion events that would challenge the deepest assumptions of two worlds in conflict. Dawn broke over the rolling hills of western Texas, painting the landscape in hues of amber and gold. Taabe had ridden through the night, putting considerable distance between them and the settlement. He finally stopped at a secluded creek sheltered by cottonwood trees, a place known to his people but rarely visited by white settlers. Elizabeth awoke with a start, coughing violently as her lungs struggled to clear the smoke residue. Disoriented and frightened, she scrambled backward until her spine pressed against a tree trunk, wide eyes fixed on the stranger who had saved her life. Who are you?" she managed between coughs. "Where am I?" Tabe knelt by the creek, soaking a piece of clean cloth. He approached slowly, offering the damp fabric to her. "For your face," he said in accented but clear English. "Water good for breathing." Elizabeth hesitated before accepting the cloth, pressing it against her face and feeling immediate relief. "You speak English," she observed, surprised momentarily. Overriding her fear. "Trade language," Tabe replied simply. He gestured to himself. "I am Tabe of the Quahati Band." Elizabeth's education had included warnings about the Comanche, depicted as ruthless raiders who showed no mercy. Yet this man had risked his life to save hers. The contradiction confounded her. "I'm Elizabeth Harmon," she responded cautiously. "Why did you help me?" Tabe busied himself checking Siwap for burn injuries, applying a salve to the horse's singed flanks. "No child should die tied to post," he finally answered. "Not Numunu child, not white child, not any child." He offered her a strip of dried meat and a handful of berries. "Eat," Need strength." Elizabeth's stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since before her punishment began. She accepted the food, watching Taabe carefully as she ate. His movements were deliberate and efficient, his expression difficult to read. Burns marked his right arm and shoulder, injuries sustained while rescuing her. "You're hurt," she said, gesturing to his wounds. Taabe glanced at his burns as if noticing them for the first time. "We'll heal," he replied dismissively. As the morning progressed, Elizabeth's fear gradually gave way to curiosity. Taabe explained that he needed to return her to her people, but doing so immediately would be dangerous. The raiders might still be in the area, and in the confusion of the attack, a Comanche warrior appearing with a white child would likely be met with gunfire before questions. "We wait one day," he decided. "Then find Army Patrol. They take you home." Elizabeth's expression darkened at the mention of home. "Maybe I don't want to go back," she muttered. Taabe paused in his preparations, studying her face. "Why your people? Tie you? What crime for child?" Elizabeth explained about the accidental fire, her voice growing softer as she described the community's reaction and her parents' acquiescence to the punishment. "I didn't mean to do it," she finished, wiping away a tear. "But nobody believed me. They said I needed to learn discipline." Taabe's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected understanding. "My people also value discipline, but we teach. Through stories, through examples, through living alongside elders." He gestured to the burns on his arm. "Pain teaches nothing except fear." As the day progressed, an unexpected dynamic developed between them. Elizabeth, whose curiosity had always been her defining characteristic, bombarded Taabe with questions about Comanche life. Rather than being annoyed, he seemed to appreciate her genuine interest, explaining concepts of his culture in ways a young white girl might understand. "Your people say we are savages," he told her as they shared a meal of rabbit that he had caught and prepared. "My people say whites have no honor, no understanding of the land. Truth is more complicated." Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "My teacher at school says the Comanche are the finest horsemen in the world." A rare smile crossed Taabe's face. "This is true," he acknowledged with a hint of pride. "Our children learn to ride before they can walk." "Could you teach me?" Elizabeth asked impulsively. "Just a little. I've only ever ridden old farm horses." Taabe considered her request, then nodded. "One lesson, short one." What followed was a remarkable afternoon where cultural barriers temporarily dissolved. Under Taabe's patient instruction, Elizabeth learned to sit Siwap properly. No saddle, just a light blanket, and to communicate with the horse through subtle shifts in weight and pressure from her legs. She fell several times but got back up immediately, determined to master even the basics of what Taabe was teaching. By late afternoon, Elizabeth was able to guide Siwap in a simple circuit around their small camp, beaming with accomplishment. Taabe watched with approval, noting her natural balance and fearlessness. "You ride well for white girl," he commented, helping her dismount. Strong spirit, Elizabeth glowed under the rare praise. No one in Clearwater had ever complimented her. Determination or physical abilities, quite the opposite. As twilight approached, however, the reality of their situation intruded. Taabe grew more vigilant, frequently scanning the horizon. "Must be careful," he explained. "Those raiders, not Comanche, not white, bad men who live in between, taking from both." Elizabeth sat close to the small, smokeless fire Taabe had built, wrapping herself in a blanket he had provided. "What will happen to you?" she asked suddenly. "When you take me back to white people?" Taabe's expression grew solemn. "If lucky, nothing. If not lucky." He shrugged, the gesture conveying more than words could. "But that's not fair," Elizabeth protested. "You saved me." "Fair is not common between our peoples," Taabe replied matter-of-factly. As night fell completely, they heard distant hoofbeats. Taabe immediately extinguished their small fire and moved Elizabeth to a concealed position among the rocks nearby. "Stay silent," he whispered, "no matter what happens." From their hiding place, they watched as a group of riders passed through. The valley below, not soldiers or settlers, but the same raiders who had attacked Clearwater. They were heading west, driving stolen horses and carrying plunder. When they had passed, Taabe returned to Elizabeth, his expression grave. "They search for something, or someone." "Me?" Elizabeth whispered, fear returning. Taabe nodded slowly. "Possible. White child with Comanche would bring many questions, maybe reward." He began gathering their few belongings. "We leave now." 2. Dangerous to wait for morning. As they prepared to depart, Elizabeth suddenly grabbed Taabe's hand. The gesture surprised him. White people rarely touched Indians willingly. "Thank you," she said earnestly, her young face serious in the moonlight. "Not just for saving me from the fire, for treating me like a person, not just a disobedient child." Something shifted in Taabe's expression, a softening around his eyes, a hint of sadness. "In my language, children are called little people, not because they are small, but because they are complete people already, just with less time on earth." Elizabeth considered this, finding profound wisdom in the concept. "I wish more people thought that way," she said softly. As they mounted Siwap together and rode into the night, neither could have anticipated how their brief encounter would challenge deep-rooted prejudices or how the understanding formed between a Comanche warrior and a white settler girl would resonate beyond their individual lives. What awaited them beyond the protective darkness, however, would test the fragile trust they had established and force both to confront the harsh realities of the world they inhabited, a world where understanding between their peoples remained as rare and precious as water in the desert. Morning light filtered through the mist as Taabe and Elizabeth approached Fort Richardson, the military outpost that served as the uneasy boundary between settler territory and the lands still contested by the Comanche. They had traveled through the night, taking a circuitous route to avoid the raiders while staying clear of both Comanche hunting parties and settler patrols. "I go no closer," Taabe said, reining Siwap to a stop on a ridge overlooking the fort. In the distance, the American flag fluttered above wooden walls, and soldiers could be seen moving about their morning duties. Army men shoot Comanche who come too close. Elizabeth felt a sudden reluctance to leave. In the short time they had spent together, Taabe had shown her more respect and understanding than she had often received in her own community. "What if I told them you saved me?" she suggested. "Surely they wouldn't—" "Words change nothing," Taabe interrupted gently. "Fear is older than words." He dismounted and helped Elizabeth down from Siwap. From his belongings, he removed a small object wrapped in soft leather. "For you," he said, placing it in her palm. "To remember." Elizabeth unwrapped the package to find a beautifully crafted miniature horse carved from antler hanging from a simple leather cord. The tiny details were exquisite. Flowing mane, powerful legs positioned in mid-gallop. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "My father made for me when I became warrior," Taabe explained. "Said it would remind me that even when path seems blocked like horse I can find way through or around or over." He gestured toward the fort. "Now you need this teaching more than me." Elizabeth impulsively threw her arms around Taabe's waist, hugging him tightly. After a moment of surprise, he awkwardly patted her shoulder. "You have strong spirit, Elizabeth Harmon," he said, using her full name for the first time. "Do not let them break it." With those words, he helped her gather the few provisions she would need for the short walk to the fort, including a water skin and some dried meat. As she prepared to leave, a cloud of dust on the horizon caught their attention. "Riders. Coming," Taabe said, his body tensing. "Many, from direction of your settlement." Through squinted eyes, Elizabeth could make out a group of mounted men approaching the fort from the east, a search party from Clearwater led by her father. Even from this distance, she recognized Thomas Harmon's distinctive posture on horseback. "It's my father," she said, her voice a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. Taab's expression darkened. "Then I must go. Now." "Wait." Elizabeth caught his arm. "What if—" What if I don't tell them about you? I could say I escaped during the fire and hid in the hills. Taabe considered her suggestion, then shook his head. Truth is better. Hard, but better. He mounted Siwap in one fluid motion. Tell them a Comanche warrior saved you. Some will not believe. Some will be angry. But seeds of truth grow slowly. Elizabeth clutched the carved horse pendant. Will I ever see you again? Our worlds separate like river and sky. Taabe replied, his voice tinged with resignation. But sometimes rain falls from sky to river. Sometimes water rises from river to sky. A rare smile crossed his features. Maybe someday. With that enigmatic answer, he turned his horse and prepared to ride away. Before he did, he looked back. Once more, remember horse teaching, Elizabeth Harmon. Find your own path. Then he was gone, riding swiftly toward the western hills, soon just a diminishing silhouette against the morning sun. Elizabeth watched until he disappeared, then turned toward the fort, the carved horse pendant hidden safely inside her dress. Taking a deep breath, she began walking down the ridge, her small figure growing more visible with each step toward the military outpost. At the fort's entrance, chaos erupted when a sentry spotted her approaching alone. Gates swung open, and soldiers rushed out, rifles ready as they scanned the surroundings for threats. A young lieutenant reached her first, quickly wrapping her in a blanket and ushering her inside the protective walls. "Child, where did you come from?" he asked, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. Before Elizabeth could answer, the search party from Clearwater arrived in a cloud of dust and urgency. Thomas Harmon practically fell from his horse in his haste to reach his daughter. "Elizabeth," he cried, his face a mask of exhaustion and relief. He embraced her tightly, his body shaking with emotion. "We thought you were dead. When the fire—" His voice broke, unable to continue. Elizabeth stood stiffly in her father's embrace, the events of the past 2 days having changed something fundamental within her. Around them, settlers and soldiers gathered, their expressions ranging from joy to suspicion. "How did you survive, child?" Reverend Collins demanded, pushing forward. "The post you were tied to was completely consumed by flames." All eyes turned to Elizabeth. In that moment, she felt the weight of a choice that seemed far beyond her 12 years, a choice between a comfortable lie and a difficult truth. Her hand moved unconsciously to the hidden pendant against her chest. "Find your own path." "I was saved," she said clearly, her young voice carrying across the suddenly silent gathering, "by a Comanche warrior who rode through the fire when no one else would." The reaction was immediate and predictable. Disbelief, outrage, and confusion erupted around her. Her father's face paled, and Reverend Collins sputtered indignantly. "Nonsense," the Reverend declared. "The girl is confused from her ordeal. Everyone knows the Comanche. His name is Taabe," Elizabeth continued firmly, cutting through the growing noise. "He could have left me to die. He could have killed me. Instead, he protected me, fed me, and brought me safely near the fort." She looked directly at her father. "He has burns on his arms from riding through the flames to cut me free." Thomas Harmon stared at his daughter, seeing something new in her, a certainty and strength that hadn't been there before. "Why would a Comanche do such a thing?" he asked quietly, genuine confusion in his voice. Elizabeth remembered Taabe's words. "Because no child should die tied to a post. Not a Comanche child, not a white child, not any child." The simplicity and moral clarity of this statement silenced even the most skeptical voices. Captain James Richardson, the fort's commander, stepped forward, studying Elizabeth with newfound interest. "This warrior, did he tell you why he was in the area? Was he alone?" Elizabeth met the captain's gaze steadily. "He was tracking the same raiders who attacked our settlement. He said they weren't Comanche or white, but bad men who live in between." This information caused a stir among the soldiers, who had been struggling to identify the perpetrators of several recent attacks. In the days that followed, Elizabeth's story spread throughout the region, met with varying degrees of belief and skepticism. For many, the idea of a Comanche warrior risking his life to save a white child contradicted everything they had been taught about the enemy. Others, particularly those who had experienced the complexity of frontier relationships, found the LBUI account credible precisely because of its unlikelihood. No one would invent such a story. For the Harmon family, the experience prompted profound soul-searching. Thomas Harmon, confronted with the reality that a supposed savage had shown more compassion toward his daughter than her own community, resigned from his position as settlement administrator. In a public address that shocked many, he openly questioned the punishment that had nearly cost his daughter's life. "We came to this frontier seeking freedom and a better way of life," he declared to the assembled settlers. "Yet we brought with us the same cruelty and rigid thinking we claimed to be escaping. My daughter lives today not because of our Christian charity, but because of the humanity of a man we have been taught to fear and hate." Elizabeth herself was transformed by her experience. The girl who had always been labeled difficult and disobedient became focused and purposeful. She convinced her increasingly supportive parents to allow her to study medicine, eventually becoming one of the first female doctors in the region. Her practice became known for treating patients of all backgrounds, settler, soldier, and Native American alike. Years later, as a young doctor riding between settlements, Elizabeth encountered a Comanche hunting party while traveling alone along a remote trail. Tense moments passed as warriors surrounded her wagon, weapons ready. The leader of the group dismounted and approached, his face now carrying the lines of additional years and experiences. "Elizabeth Harmon," Tabe said simply, a hint of pride in his voice. "You found your path." Elizabeth touched the antler horse pendant that she still wore beneath her clothing. "You showed me how," she replied with equal simplicity. Their second meeting was brief. The realities of their worlds still largely separate and often in conflict. But in that moment, as a Comanche warrior and a white frontier doctor regarded each other with mutual respect, earned through shared experience, something rare and valuable was acknowledged. The possibility that understanding could exist even across the deepest divides. Neither could know that their story, passed down through generations in both cultures, would endure long after the frontier wars ended, a testament to the truth that compassion and courage recognize no boundaries, and that sometimes the most important boundaries to cross are those we build in our minds. As Elizabeth continued her journey and Taabe returned to his people, the antler horse pendant remained a physical connection between them, a small but powerful reminder that even in the most divided times, individual acts of humanity can create ripples that extend far beyond a single moment or a single life. And in the history of the American frontier, among countless tales of conflict and misunderstanding, the story of a young girl tied to a post and the warrior who rode through fire to save her would be remembered not for its spectacular elements, but for its simple truth, that the path to greater understanding often begins with a single act of courage.